When we look at other parts of this earth upon which we live, we find that black, brown, red, and yellow people in Africa and Asia are getting their independence. They're not getting it by singing, "We shall overcome." No, they're getting it through nationalism. It is nationalism that brought about the independence of the people in Asia. Every nation in Asia gained its independence through the philosophy of nationalism. Every nation on the African continent that has gotten its independence brought it about through the philosophy of nationalism. And it will take black nationalism that to bring about the freedom of 22 million Afro-Americans here in this country where we have suffered colonialism for the past 400 years. America is just as much a colonial power as England ever was. America.
Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I made a little mix-up with my little intros. I wanted to go straight to the Malcolm, but there you go. Thank you all, everyone, for joining us on We Charge Colonialism's streaming network here. I thank them a lot for letting us use this. My name is Toivo Esheke, and I work with actually a number of the orgs you see here. Back in Azania, Black First Land First. I'm in the Bronx. I'm working with Take Back the Bronx. I'm here in Atlanta. I work with the Malcolm X grassroots movement as well as community movement builders, all of them in some way, shape, or form, Black nationalist formations. So we are here to discuss Azania's future horizons beyond the elections with my comrade Andile. This is so important. I'm very happy that he's able to join us right now because this year, for those of you who know, marks the 30-year anniversary of the ANC coming to power. Right, and this for those of you in the U.S., right, in the wider diaspora, you know it. Nelson Mandela, some of these figures, right, are figures that you may know from this. Winnie Mandela, right. Some of you may know Steve Biko, right. Some may know Sobukwe and some other Robert Sobukwe and folks, right. But this struggle, of course, in South Africa, what many of us call Azania, has always been very, very tied to the global Black struggle. And so what we have here is a very interesting year where, for the first time, it is a possibility that the ANC may lose what's called the 50% majority in parliament, right? It's very possible. Their numbers have been shrinking each election as the ANC has, to some people, becoming more, if you will, neoliberal and corrupt as time has gone on, or for some of us who've known them longer are doing what we thought they would do in power, right? Which is why many of us were not necessarily on their side in particular points in time during the struggle. There were different visions of what the struggle should look like. And this today will sort of give you a sort of a Black consciousness, Black nationalist, sort of Black internationalist vision on what's going to be happening. So I don't want to take too much time. We do have some other comrades from Kenya and hopefully our comrade from Haiti who also can join us to participate in this discussion. But again, comrades are organizing and they're doing what they have to do, and time zones are different. They will jump on when they jump on. So what I would like, just very briefly, if Sean and Andile could just introduce themselves, and then once you introduce yourselves briefly, just the orgs you're working with, where you're located right now, then we're going to give Andile about 25 minutes to give just a talk on the upcoming election, future prospects, what are the implications for the wider movement, not just in Azania, but also in the Southern Africa, and also this, the wider Black International. As you know, there's an election also in the U.S., for example. Also in Namibia, where I'm from, there's elections, as well as Botswana. So it's a big year of a lot of things happening. And before we jump into introductions, I do want to say a few things. One, we really want to be very clear that we stand in solidarity with our comrades in Palestine who are fighting Israeli white settler colonial occupation. The Azania, the African liberation movements and Black struggles have always stood in solidarity with the Palestinians, right? And naturally, we want to always see those solidarities reciprocated. But the reality has always been that we have stood with those people. I also want to acknowledge, from the Namibian perspective, the recent passing of our third president, Hage Geingob, President Hage Geingob. He passed away a few days ago in office. This is also a year of the election, so it was a tricky year for this. Of course, no sitting president passing is good, but we have elections this year, so he was already on his way out, if you will. But I wanted to acknowledge that. And with that, I want to just maybe perhaps I'll just give it to Sean to introduce yourself, and then Andile. And then Andile, after you introduce yourself, I'm going to get us off screen, and then you do your thing. So Sean, and then Andile.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Hudson. Sorry, I forgot to put the whole name there on the thing right there. Um, yeah, so I've been an organizer for going on 6 years now. I've been with Take Back the Bronx as a political grassroots prison abolitionist org, and I'm also a member of Eyes on You, which is a committee comprised of political organizers such as myself and other prison abolitionists, along with family members of loved ones that are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. We also have people who are medical providers in that group and people who were either formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated as well. Um, as far as Take Back the Bronx is concerned, we definitely are fighting on the front lines against gentrification, police brutality, and against the constant oppression that Black and Brown people face every
Sure. My name is Andy Matama. I'm currently the president of a Black nationalist organization, which is guided by Black consciousness, as developed by Steve Biko. We are also highly influenced by the work of Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. Maybe if there's a bit of time, we can talk about how we have tried to operationalize the Sankara idiom of leadership into the South African attempts of liberation. And I have also been active in social movements such as the Landless People's Movement, Blackwash, and the September National Imbizo. I was also a member of parliament for the economic freedom fighters of Comrade Julius Malema, and we had ideological fallouts. As a result, I was expelled. But yeah, this is an exciting year, and we'll talk a little bit more later on prospects for a possible left orientated results.
Thank you so much. So Andile, do your thing. I'm starting my time. I'll give you a 5-minute thing at some point. Maybe check your chat, but please now proceed.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining in, and also I want to thank Comrade Toivo for this invite. By the way, Comrade Toivo, just a biographical note there that your father, who was incarcerated in Robben Island with Nelson Mandela and others, was a big figure in the Black consciousness movement. In fact, we appreciated the Namibian struggle as a consequence of his teachings of our leaders on Robben Island, and that solidarity and Black consciousness thinking got cemented. And the liberation of Namibia was something that we looked up to. And of course, as happened, the failures of the South African post-1994 or post-apartheid reality is almost a carbon copy of the failures in Namibia as well. So we have a very close affinity. Now, what I want to do is simply to update the diaspora on the 30 years of the ANC rule and the prospects for a possible left-wing development as a consequence of the elections later this year. Quickly, in South Africa, Black people started the African National Congress in 1912. It was a response to the settler colonialists having a process to enact the Land Act. That Land Act gave 13% of the land to Africans and 87% of the land to the settler colonialists. So the ANC was formed to respond to that, and it was called the African Native National Congress. It was a blacks-only movement. So, in a sense, our nationalism started as an organized form under the ANC. However, by 1955, white liberals who are claimed to be communists have infiltrated the ANC to the extent that it adopted a program called the Freedom Charter, and that program departed significantly from the initial African nationalist roots of the ANC. We then have the situation where that program called the Freedom Charter led to the breakaway of serious Africanists such as Robert Sobukwe from the ANC, forming the Pan-Africanist Congress. So from that point, it was clear that South African liberation movement is divided. There was the ANC, which was accommodationist, liberal for civil rights. And you have the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, led by Sobukwe, for national liberation. Biko stands on the shoulders of Sobukwe to articulate the Black Consciousness Project, which deepened African nationalism and made sure that Black people understand what the problem is and how colonialism had affected us psychologically. So you have Sobukwe and Biko representing therefore this radical nationalism, the ANC representing accommodationist politics. That is why by 1994, the ANC was able to get into arrangement with the settler regime to form a government of national unity and entrench in the constitution the idea that land in the hands of the colonialists cannot be taken back except for buying it from the colonialists. So you have a settler accommodationist program of liberation, which simply said land cannot be touched. That is why 30 years after the ANC rule, we have the same situation of the majority of land being in the hands of the settler regime. That is true also with the economy. Racism is rife in South Africa, despite the fact that we are a Black majority, unlike in the US where our people there are a minority, and therefore it's difficult to use the political process to achieve national liberation. Here we are a majority. Now, the settler regime, which owns the economy, controls politics in South Africa. And that is why you have the atomization of the Black bloc. You have so many political parties, all of them, of course, controlled and funded by white monopoly capital. So where we are now in South Africa is where we have the possibility once again to articulate a radical project in the political formal sense through this political party or MK of Jacob Zuma, which in a sense carries forward the national Black nationalism, which has been undermined in the ANC. So his main program is land expropriation without compensation, echoing the call by the EFF. And if I may just pause and say that the EFF is a very controversial movement in the South African context if you look at it from a consistent left radical perspective. It has normalized giving political power to a racist white party in South Africa. As there is a fight between EFF and the ANC, the EFF has found accommodation with the Democratic Alliance, which is a party of settler colonialism and racism. They have normalized giving it political power. And in fact, there's a real possibility that after these elections of this year, there could be an arrangement with this racist party with the EFF. There's also another possibility, the captured ANC. Now, what happened in 2017 is that white monopoly capital, settler capital in South Africa, organized 1 billion rand and gave it to a candidate of the ANC to capture the ANC on behalf of white settler capitalism. So the current president is a Trojan horse, a representative of white monopoly capital. And we believe that he will either go with the Democratic Alliance, this racist party, or form a government with the EFF, which will be a government controlled still by white monopoly capital. The development of the Mkhonto Wesizwe, which is the party controlled and run by President Zuma, disrupts this right-wing consolidation of South African politics, because it is a counterpoint which is representing radical black nationalism once more. Unfortunately, the established black consciousness organizations, which are minuscule, including the Pan-Africanists, in the past 30 years, the black consciousness movement and the Pan-Africanist movement have become almost irrelevant in the mainstream politics of South Africa. They have one representative in parliament, the Pan-Africanist Congress. AZAPO has not been able, which is the Azanian People's Organization, which is the organization that took over after Steve Biko to try to sustain a black consciousness movement in occupied Azania, our country. So Pan-Africanism as organized force like that, and the black consciousness movement as organized in AZAPO, has become irrelevant in South African politics, by and large. Of course, ideologically, it still sounds, but organizationally very weak, leaving, therefore, the possibility to fight white capital in the hands of fractions of the ANC. And the progressive fraction of the ANC right now is that one represented by Jacob Zuma. That is why our movement, Black First, Land First, is not going to be on the ballot in the coming elections. We're going to vote with Mkhonto Wesizwe, this party of radical black nationalism by President Zuma. So South Africa is a normal neo-colonial reality. Racism lives and thrives in South Africa. Black exclusion from the economy is real and continues. In fact, the ANC rule has been so anti-black that when workers in a big mine in Marikana struggled and striked for a living wage, 35 of them were murdered by the ANC government. And so the ANC government is an instrument of white power to sustain the profit margins of white capital. And of course, they emerged a small middle class, which ideologically is also now amenable to the white supremacist liberal project. And of course, the state has become an instrument for accumulation for a small middle class. Corruption is therefore systematic as part of accessing the economy. Black people have no means to access the economy except through corrupt means, and also having to subordinate themselves to capital accumulation model. So we are junior players in the economy, and the state, you know, one of the things that explains why the 30 years of the ANC rule is not providing change is that in the negotiations, firstly, the land question, we negotiate away our right to land. Secondly, we negotiate our right to political power. You know, in South Africa right now, the Constitutional Court is the Supreme Court. Under apartheid, they used to have parliamentary supremacy. Parliament was supreme, even higher than the courts. When they negotiated, they made sure that the courts, the Constitutional Court, 11 people, I have the final say on any big policy question. And interpreting it in terms of the Constitution, a Constitution which, as I said, was designed to undermine the liberation project of Black people. So we have locked ourselves into these neo-colonial arrangement. And the ANC under Thabo Mbeki was very clear and articulate about supporting a neoliberal project, including how the economy was structured. Zuma, when he came after Mbeki, tried to disrupt that by harping back to these questions of Black nationalism, bringing back the land question, bringing back the question of ownership of the economy. But the truth of the matter is that the ANC is continuing with a neoliberal, pro-white, anti-black rule. And this is going to be sustained. And as I say, white capital has bought a big section of the ANC, including the president of the ANC, by the way, who had shares in the mines where workers were murdered in Marikana. And he sent the police saying that they must take serious action. So he has become part of the bodyguards of white interest in South Africa. Look, South Africa is a normal neo-colonial, anti-black, racist country, despite the fact that we have political power. We have not been able to use it because our leaders and our politics are captured by settler colonial interests. So you have a government, therefore, of house Negroes, to use Malcolm X's terms, who serve the interests of whiteness as opposed to serving the interests of the black majority. But as I say, there's a big possible shift in the South African politics after these elections, where Umkhonto weSizwe might become a pillar or a post to draw our politics back to the left radical possibility. And I believe that Umkhonto weSizwe can also discipline ideologically the economic freedom fighters so that they don't flip-flop so much, where one time they are with white monopoly capital settlers, land thieves, and on the other time they are with us. Umkhonto weSizwe can become a stabilizing force ideologically for a left-wing possibility. And that is why we are calling in South Africa for all the progressive movements to gravitate towards the Umkhonto weSizwe program under President Zuma. There are criticisms of the Zuma administrations and how he exercised power when he was in power. Some of them make sense. He took too long before he moved left. In his first 5 years, he was implementing the program of Thabo Mbeki of neoliberalism, anti-blackness, but he did move left. And you know, the irony is that when he moved left, it is exactly the point where the economic freedom fighters joined hands with white monopoly capital and supported a program saying that Zuma must go, a program similar to what was happening in Brazil with with capital organizing of civil society against the Lula administration. It's exactly what happened here in South Africa. Now, that moment of organizing against Zuma in collaboration with imperialism and white monopoly capital have pushed the liberation agenda quite backwards for many, many years, we believe. And it has normalized this possibility that white capital and settler colonialism can insert itself in our politics. They are now actively
All right, I think Andele's internet went down. Let me quickly just text him just to see what's up. So for folks, I'm not sure exactly where Andele is, but just so that folks sort of know some context, South Africa right now has a situation where there's these things called rolling blackouts. I'm not exactly sure because of some of the power overloads in some of the national grids. So it's very, very possible that some internet may have gone off because of the power. But maybe there's another way when the backups get in, he'll be able to kind of jump back on. So maybe I'll try to quote unquote stall just for a little bit. I'm going to pause this thing real quick. Just maybe to quickly just maybe I'll use this as a small opportunity to sort of just maybe summarize a little bit what Andile is talking about. So part of what we wanted to do with this talk for folks is that we wanted folks, particularly in the diaspora, right, those outside South Africa, to sort of get a sense of what's happening this year in South Africa, right? And why is it important, right? Because there's a lot of different things happening in South Africa, and it can be confusing for folks who don't know some of the internal politics of what's going on, right? And as many folks know, last year there were the coups in the Sahel, right? And then they could have broken from France, and there've been some attempts to sort of build something different, right? South Africa for so long was this beacon of what people thought was, light, beacon of hope for a particular kind of a radical transformative government in Africa, but it has not worked out that way. And so what Andile is trying to show us, right, is that here are the different players, different peoples who are shifting and pushing agendas to sort of realize the sort of Azania that many of us have been talking about, right? And so what we see right now is that I think I put in the chat how some of the politics works in South Africa is that the ANC needs to have over 50% of the total vote in parliament, right? In order to pass through what it wants to pass through without having to work with other parties, if you will, to do that, right? And that's how it's been since more or less since 94. Although they had to have a transitionary period where they were in coalition with the National Party. So actually, that first term, it was actually very limited in what they could do. But mostly afterwards, from 99 onwards, they had a very clear 2/3 majority in the parliament. But that number has come down, right? As people have been disaffected with the ANC, and in particular, EFF has grabbed the number of that, as well as a rising DA in some areas, and a whole bunch of smaller parties that are very, very, very big in the South African context, right? These local parties are very, very important in South Africa. So part of what is happening now is in the internal fights in the ANC, what the discussion has been is that, the people here have struggled and fought with you because we want land, economic distribution, we want safety, we want homes, we want an actual transformed economy, right? And the fight has been on, are we doing that the right way? Are we even doing it at all? Who's a sellout and who's not? And there have been a whole bunch of fights and internal contradictions around that. Jacob Zuma essentially has been trying to right now rally around, if you will, the left wing. Okay, Andile is coming back. If you will, the left wing elements, as it were, of South Africa, and is basically sort of arguing that we have to push the EFF a little bit more also, given there also are beefs between Malema and Jacob Zuma that go back to some of the splits even that Andile is talking about, right? And so the argument is we need to get those grassroots Black nationalist forces together to vote for progressive parties, to hopefully even get the ANC under 50%, to force them to be in coalition with the more Black radical elements, if you will, right? And to prevent them from making alliances with others. We're not sure how that will work, or at least to push some of them to show their true colors and make certain alliances and then force certain splits, perhaps. So the argument essentially is are we going to redistribute land and win, right? And you know what that means. If you start going after white folk land, it ain't going. It's not just going to be like this. It ain't going to let you do that, right? And that essentially is what the contradiction. I see Andile is trying to jump back in. So this is essentially sort of the contradiction. And ANC, like Namibia and SWAPO, generally what they have decided to do was not to seize land immediately, but to slowly purchase land back, and then to purchase particular types of land back, right? In order for a particular, almost like a national development model, versus giving land to people who dispossessed to do with it what they want to do with it. Do you see what I'm saying? And so here is now where we sort of find ourselves, right? And this election, Ramaphosa a few years ago was making comments about getting land back, because that was very hype at a particular moment. But then once those fires, they were able to simmer some of them down, they've just reversed, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is sort of what Andile is trying to do in some of his discussions. And again, I think Andile is trying to get back on. I saw him a little bit, and then he jumped back off. I think for other comrades who could maybe relate, one of the things when I was in the Bronx, and Sean, I'm saying the Bronx, I'm about to maybe possibly bring you in right now, just because Andile is not there. I don't want to be talking for the whole time by myself. So I'm about to maybe bring you in. But one of the things that was very, I could recognize in some of the Bronx politics, is that indeed in the Bronx you have had Black and Latinx leadership in the local politics for some times in different positions. You have actually had that, right? And it has led to levels of confusion in some ways, right? Particularly, you've also had a number of former radicals, right, who are Black and Latinx, right, who then have now come into power in particular positions, who have now created some kinds of confusions, right? You know, AOC, right, who everybody loves, right? She's representing areas there, right? And there's a whole bunch of like contradictions with that as well, right? So maybe I was gonna maybe throw a question at Sean as we sort of give Andile some time to get back. Part of what we wanted here, we called it the Pan-African Coalition, but a lot of it was kind of the different perspectives. You know, Kenya, we had someone from the Caribbean, you know, if you will, Black America, also sort of to kind of engage with South Africa, because South Africa has been important to all those places, right? And now what does that mean now 30 years after? So maybe to Sean, to kick it to you, you know, maybe your own thoughts, if you will, of what you've heard so far, but also maybe his thoughts around how do, you know, as Black radical forces, how do we deal even within, like as Black radicals, Black nationalists, whatever you want to call ourselves, right? How do we then deal with, you know, these other Black folk who then are also, you know, effing with us, and actually, just as Andile is saying, can be as white supremacists as, you know, and systemically, in terms of their systemic power, as any white person. You know, what are your thoughts around some of that?
Hey, thank you, Suevo. You can hear me? Hear me clearly? You can hear me clearly? Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure. So yeah, it was Ndele was dropping a lot of gems, you know, about what's going on in South Africa. And one of the things that really stood out to me was when he said, I'm just want to make sure I'm trying to quote exactly what he said, like how in America here, us as Black folks were the minority, and therefore like in other countries, right, like South Africa, and where other Black people across the diaspora are the majority, you guys get to use the political system to make gains to fight for your liberation, whereas over here it's just three-card Monty. It's just a scam over here pretty much, and that's why, like Trevor, you know, one of our 4 points is, you know, we don't mess with politicians, right? And the reason why is because us here, like Take Back the Bronx, is like, you know, the reason why we don't mess with them is because they're basically middlemen from the elite. You know, um, they're like, you know, like Malcolm X said, the wolf and the fox. The wolf will tear you out the frame off the rip. You already know what they're about. Those are like conservatives and right wingers. They tell you off the rip they don't mess with you. They're not for you. They're not about anything to help you. Whereas liberals, Democrats, they go ahead. They'll tell you, they give you the same song and dance. Yo, hey, you my man, yo, you my lady, yo, I got you, and then stab you in the back and sell you out in a heartbeat. And to your point about, you know, Black people, Black politicians, like we have a we have a Black mayor right now. We have Eric Adams. He's an ex cop, you know, and you know, perfect example. Like, you know, there's always been Black politicians, you know, out there, but they're all skin folk and not your kinfolk. You know, words is over Neil Hurston. Um, at the end of the day, just because you put a Black face in a position of power doesn't mean that it's going to be for the people. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's where a lot of us we get so caught up in liberal identity politics that we get so caught up in, oh my God, like we got one of our own in there. They're gonna do great, and then fail to realize the bigger picture. We fail to realize that just because this person looks like you, maybe talk like you, or come from the same community as you, doesn't necessarily mean they're for you. They're there for white interests, like Endell was saying. You know, you got sellouts in the community. You know, some that were used to be radicals. You know, you got plenty of former Young Lord members or Black Panther members that went ahead and went on to become politicians and went on to do the opposite of what they was going against when they was our age or younger. You know, and I feel like to me, it's not just one way to combat it. you got to have a toolbox of tactics, you know, because we're dealing with an octopus of oppression. There's so many different tentacles, you know, that you're dealing with every day, that we deal with every day on so many levels. That's why I tell people, like, right now, I feel like the best way to combat it is through political education and propaganda, you know,
Absolutely.
because right now, what we're seeing is good. Oh no, sorry, I thought you was gonna cut in.
Yeah, no. There's a little delay, but no worries. Just finish
No,
your
but
thought.
good. Oh, okay. I feel like since 2020, when we had the rebellions and everything, I feel like since then you've seen this gradual retaking of, you know, information and the control of it. Like, think about it. We live in a country where you could buy AR-15 at Walmart, but you can't read books or teach about Black history, LGBTQ history, Native American history,
Yo,
women's
talk that
history.
talk.
You know, and then you got so many so many things going on with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like
Absolutely.
the best way to do it is the education.
Got you. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Sean. So yeah, I think Andile, I think, is back. Andile, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, comrade.
Okay, no problem. So I was telling them maybe it might be a rolling blackout situation. And I sort of was just summarizing a few things, and me and Sean were talking a little bit. But please continue.
Yes, I mean, basically, where we are in South Africa today is, as I said, on the verge of a right-wing consolidation, which has been a right-wing government for the longest time, since 1994. You know, when we do an analysis of the three presidents of the ANC, now we are a little bit more sympathetic to Nelson Mandela's compromises, only because they were time bound. Mandela negotiated to co-rule with white people for 5 years, and post that the ANC got 2/3 majority, which is the threshold which allows you to amend the constitution. So they could have, under Thabo Mbeki's 2/3 majority, address some of the big compromises that Mandela undertook so that he can access state power. Now they were in power. They needed to exercise that power to solve the big historical questions, and they didn't. We even know that Thabo Mbeki, by the way, opposed Black South Africans' case in the United States of America, where they were suing apartheid companies which supported apartheid to murder and maim us here in South Africa. We know that Thabo Mbeki supported the companies which were supporting apartheid. We also know that the whole shift to a right-wing Thatcherite macroeconomic program was undertaken under Mbeki. Now you had Zuma, who, as I said, followed a little bit of the Mbeki project, and then he abandoned it. When he abandoned it, he became the big enemy. He was touted to be corrupt. He was vilified. The white monopoly capital, which controls South African media, undertook a big program of ideologically soiling the name of Zuma. As a consequence, he was also kicked out of parliament. Now, we are regrouping under his leadership to challenge the ANC and to challenge the settlement, which is anti-Black, to try to make sure that we use our political majority power to address the big historical questions which have not been addressed in the past 30 years. So in South Africa today, we have the possibility of articulating a left agenda, as I say, but there is also the big danger of a consolidation of the right-wing agenda with the ANC if it gets less than 50% and it goes into alliance with the racist settler colonial Democratic Alliance. They will then have normalized a proper right-wing government, which I believe in some ways might be a good thing because it will force the left to consolidate itself in a more serious way, in a more concerted way, to challenge that arrangement, which will sustain the anti-black project of the ANC thus far. So 2024 in South Africa presents real possibilities of rupture from the neoliberal, neo-colonial, anti-black status quo to articulate another agenda. But we must be careful when you analyze the South African political party system and the political parties. Some of them speak left but act right. So we have those possible pitfalls still as we develop a challenge to the ANC neoliberal settlement. It is ironic that the person who is becoming the attracting rod, the point of energy to challenge the ANC come from the ANC itself. Well, that is the contradictions of the South African political scene, basically. Thank you, comrade.
No, absolutely. No, thank you very much for that breakdown again. And so what we're going to do now is some of my other comrades were supposed to have come, but again, these things happen. A lot of our comrades again are like on the ground doing some of this work. So I will step in for one of our Angolan comrades who was our Angolan / a SADC comrade, if you would. I'm going to jump in and maybe ask a question for, if you will, Andile. So thank you so much for laying some of this out and sort of thinking about some of the stakes. I also brought when you were gone a little bit about the land question, and just to kind of just reminding people again that we do not own the majority of the land, right? It is still white families and particular white families who own the land still, right? So I just brought that up there also as well. So maybe the first question I would kick to you then is, what are some of the prospects that us in SADC can think about as we come out of this election in Azania, right? And I think SADC is Southern African Development Community, for folks who don't know this, but mostly particularly think of Zimbabwe, particularly with the immigrant crisis, right? We think of Namibia with even our unresolved tensions. Angola just had their own election last year, I believe, or the year before. There's like a rise even then of like UNITA party, which for me historically sounds wild, but that's actually how bad the MPLA have come, Mozambique has its issues it's going through as well. Botswana also has its elections. Eswatini has some of its things as well. So I'm sort of just maybe curious if you could maybe maybe if we focus on the one hand, the immigrant question, which route can we go, particularly with the violence against, if you will, other African immigrants and migrants who are coming into South Africa for, again, a lot of the tough things that we are seeing in terms of the internal contradictions of being in a capitalist economy and the inequalities that are still there. Which route offers the best, if you will, for that population in terms of the migrant population we're talking about in South Africa, right? And then maybe if you could also gesture in your own thoughts, just what are some of the implications of the different directions South Africa go to the region? Because whether many of us like it or not, what happens in South Africa is very, very important to then what happens in Namibia and then in Botswana and then in some of these other places. So that question makes sense, Andile, just broadly in those terms.
Yes, thank you, comrades. There's a breakdown from time to time, so I'll just persist and hopefully now. In these elections in South Africa, actually, one of the big questions is going to be on the immigration question. The white establishment is supporting the view that the problem in South Africa is immigrants from outside of South Africa. And of course, this does find expression in the hiring practices of white monopoly capital, which controls the economy and it decides who to employ. A situation is being created where our people here in South Africa think about their problems as generated by immigrants from outside of South Africa. But this is a sponsored view by white monopoly capital to remove our attention from understanding the problem as created and sustained by white capital. So the immigrant has become in a sense, scapegoat to remove our gaze from the primary contradiction, which is the contradiction of capital. And this anti-black sentiment is highly sponsored and supported by white capital. So these elections are going to be fought also on that basis. There's lots of new parties, highly funded, all of them anti-immigrants. And this sentiment in South Africa is taking serious hold and might determine the outcome of the elections. But as I say, it is a deliberate program designed and sponsored by white monopoly capital to move our attention from the central contradiction, which is white capital. Now, we can see the right-wing moves in the post-colonial Southern African countries, Mozambique and Angola. That situation of Angola may tell us what might happen in South Africa with Renamo, UNITA becoming normalized as a force of politics, just like in Mozambique, Renamo also taking a big chunk of the elections. So right-wing forces are coming into play and are being legitimized also by the failures of the liberation movement itself. In South Africa, it is very easy to simply say the problem is the ANC because it is so corrupt, and its corruption is very palpable. Our people can see it, and therefore it is easy to simply turn our attention to the ANC instead of turning our attention to white monopoly capital, settler capital, which is the controller of the ANC. So we have this challenge, therefore, in these settler states, where settler nations such as South Africa, Namibia, I would say a little bit Angola and Mozambique, where the post-colonial situation has turned against the liberation movement because of its failures. And as a consequence, a right-wing agenda has become legitimate. This is true for most of our countries.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. So I'm gonna jump to Sean now, and I'm gonna put Sean up on stage so Sean can sort of maybe engage with you also, but really also now from the Black American perspective, right? Again, of course, Sean doesn't speak for the entire movement. I don't want to at all put that on him or any of us, right? But a particular perspective that I think is very localized, very grassroots, very committed and radical. And then he'll have his question to you. And then I'll come back again with another question from more the perspective of the Caribbean. But yes, Sean, please take your time, ask a question or questions, like your thoughts.
Hey, sorry about that. So I guess my first question is, how can we as a people, right? How do we build global solidarity between Black Americans and Black South Africans and Black people, honestly, all across the diaspora? Because what I'm noticing here in America is that, from my lived experience, is that a lot of times there's always this sort of divide, and conquer mentality between, Black Americans and Black Africans and Black Caribbeans and Black people all across the diaspora, where, the conditioning and basically the stereotypes and the white supremacist myths are always, what's the word I'm looking for? Always ingrained and embedded in us, to be against each other. Like, for example, I'm going to say this, for example, for the people watching this, when you have Black Africans that come from South Africa or other parts of the diaspora, and some of them come over here and say, hey, Black Americans, you guys are lazy, this, that, and the third. or you have some Black Americans that look down on Black Africans and say, you know, oh, you guys are poor, this, that, and the third. You know, I just want to know from your perspective, how do we combat that ignorance, you know, stereotypes, and how do we build solidarity all across
the world? If I may just remind us all that the modern project of Black liberation as the anti-colonial struggle is an idea which is formulated from the diaspora, actually, initially, including the meetings that then happened in London, which were also attended by some of the Black nationalists from the diaspora. So our idea of a liberation has its genesis in the diaspora, and we have to sustain this Pan-African imagination of our oneness as a people. I think it is shocking that with the capacity for communication we have today, our movements are so atomized, are so unlinked. We should be able to organize on an annual basis a diaspora-wide Black point of engagement. So we all converge, assess the different attempts to organize and to fight, and to learn from each other and to support each other's struggles. The stuff happening in West Africa with the coups and so on, we should be able as Pan-Africanists to have direct access to the leaders of those movements, to have critical dialogue, supportive solidarity, to also share the lessons and the difficulties that are going in there, so that when our turn comes, we're able to mobilize the experiences that our brothers and sisters are undergoing right now. There is no reason whatsoever that we don't have a very strong Pan-Africanist movement today. We have the capacity for communication. We must mobilize it, and we must be able to understand and know what is happening. I mean, for instance, the Caribbean have fallen off our agenda. We don't support what's happening in Haiti. The Haitian people, I mean, a few years ago, their progressive president was murdered. The struggles of the people there needs our solidarity. And I'm saying that perhaps you can start under this platform to call for a global point of engagement in the next 12 months, where we all converge to present a Pan-Africanist response to the crisis of liberation that our people are experiencing in the different spaces that we find ourselves in. There's no reason whatsoever why we can't do that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer.
And Sean, if you want to give a follow-up, we have time. If you have, or if you have another question you would like to ask, please feel free.
Okay. I just got one more really. Like when you were having the technical difficulties, me and Suevo was talking about, you know, a point that you made earlier about how about the sellouts, you know, you have the Black African politicians that are selling people out, and we were talking about over here, like the difference in terms of the fact that you guys are the majority over there, and the fact that Black Americans are the minority over here, and how we can't really use the political system to really gain liberation. And I just want to know from your perspective, like, what way would you say? Because I know the way that us as Sake Black Demons, we believe in community control. We don't really support politicians in any way, shape, or form. Because we know we're the minority, we know that they're middlemen for the elite, as we say. But I want to know from your perspective, from your lived experience, what ways, what tactics do you guys use? politics and the political system over there to gain your liberation or to fight against oppression, I should say?
You know, our oppression was a national oppression by a highly sophisticated modern state almost, which pushed the white supremacist agenda. And therefore, our articulation of our liberation movement was, as Nkrumah, take ye political power first, and everything else will be added upon thee. So we stand on the vantage point of our numerical superiority to try to use that to articulate a political agenda that will put the interests of the black majority first. That what informs our attitude to state power. And the difficulty in the US is precisely that black people can never take state power because of the numerical situation. However, we must operate just like Malcolm X was operating, with thinking that as the diaspora, as part of the majority, which is African. There's nothing that stops African states to directly interface with the Black American people in terms of supporting programs, in terms of mutual support, in terms of strengthening their voices, including up to the UN. We must treat the African people in the US as a nation on its own and insist that its voice must get a representation, including at the fora such as the UN. So that Black nationalist project must be pursued, and we must accept that Black people in America are a unique group of people, and they have undergone a unique historical experience, and therefore our Black majority position in the African continent must benefit them as well. We have to find ways in which we speak for our interest and leveraging the advantages that we have whilst located in the different places on earth.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so then I have just briefly, I have two. Let's just say one more question. And then I want to leave open if you want to ask myself or Sean other some questions, just from you, any questions that you wish to have, so we can maybe also kind of think with you also to kind of close us out. But the last question I have, maybe to put the Caribbean on in spotlight, as you did mention, right? You know, the Caribbean has in some ways, it's interesting, kind of fallen off in some ways of our direct lens of analysis, particularly on the continent side, I would say most definitely in the spaces that I've been in, et cetera, and not even to mention Brazil and other places. But just from your own perspective, how would you analyze the situation between Haiti and Kenya, where the Kenyan leadership, you know, of course, initially agreed to send what you want to call it, send the UN policing force, et cetera, to basically be the black faces to be in Haiti, to do some of the work that the other white folks can't get away with, right? Maybe in your own sense, it's just how would you kind of what when you were hearing that, you know, what was your analysis? What are your thoughts on that? And then we can turn it over to you to ask us any questions as we close off.
I think it is a tragic situation. During the time of liberation, we have gone to Haiti to defend the Haitian revolution, not to buttress the new colonial forces that are oppressing the Haitian people. But this shows you the reversals which have happened from the point of view of Black solidarity, from the point of view of a Pan-Africanist imagination, which is radical, revolutionary, anti-imperialist, and anti-colonialist. So that is why we can have a neo-colonial state of Kenya doing what it is doing. We must condemn that with the strongest possible terms and insist for us defending Haiti we must be actually organizing ourselves physically to deal with this problem so that the Haitian revolutionary process can be resuscitated and defended and consolidated. Um, but yeah, that shows you where we are politically as a people. We have reversed in a big way. It's as if Nkrumah never appeared. It's as if the diaspora never worked with the Africans on the continent for the liberation project. But it's up to us to honestly assess where we are and start thinking about solidarity. I mean, in the African continent, I mean, the situation of the ongoing wars, the failure to respond, even the South African government, it's big with Palestine, which is good, but says nothing about the DRC, says nothing about Sudan, it says nothing about what's happening in the Sahel. So this make this solidarity with Palestine look also opportunistic because it is not consistent, it does not put the interest of our people first. So we have to be consistent in standing with the side of the oppressed. We can't be pro-Palestine and say nothing about the oppression of our people in the African continent. So it is basically having to hark back to the original sentiments of Pan-Africanism. As we know, these come from the diaspora, and you know how African countries were sacrificing for South Africa, for instance. When we were fighting the white settlers here at home, our people in the African continent were contributing financially, contributing politically, contributing even with their lives. You know, the Mozambican president, loved son of Mozambique, Samora Machel, was murdered by the apartheid regime precisely because of his position in supporting our liberation. And many other spaces were similarly decimated. Mozambique was destroyed as a nation precisely because of his position as an entry point for our liberation movement. We have been before in a position where we're able to sacrifice for one another. We have to go back there. But the first thing is circulate information. It cannot be that the Caribbean situation has fallen off the agenda of Pan-Africanists and Black consciousness activists. We have to find ways to put back into imagination these struggles of our people and remember that we are one people and facing the same enemy.
Absolutely. And I really wanted to second that about the opportunism around being pro-Palestine, but then not talking about what's happening in the, in the African continent, in the Sahel, in the DRC, and even in Afro. And I know Sean's very happy with this because some of us say some of these things and sometimes it's on the unpopular position at a particular time. I've always been very, very clear, like I'm here in Georgia right now in Atlanta, and I've been doing a lot of work just researching and looking at just, the Black American populations here in the southeastern United States who have been here for 200 and 300 years, right? So for all intents and purposes, they're indigenous, if you wish to use that terminology, which we know has its problems. But I have an issue, but historically, through Jim Crow, they have been kicked off the land, dispossessed, right? And ironically, in that 1913 Land Act time, all this is happening. And so for me, I always say, if there's a right of return that we're fighting for Palestinians, which we are fighting for, then we have to have a right of return for the Black Americans here and the First Nations people here in the South. How can I even with some legitimacy tell a Palestinian I can actually fight for your right of return, but here I am with no right of return myself in my own backyard? Then I think on one level, it doesn't actually make sense. Right? As much as solidarity is good, if you can't even get your own backyard, how can you take care of mine? So I more just kind of more I say it in that way. But no, thank you so much for those comments. I think it's very much on point. I also just wanted to leave a moment, the last 5-10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so that we have. Are there questions that you, Andile, have of us? We are here in the U.S., which is its own unique situation, as you know. I wish my Kenyans and my Haitian comrades were here. We have been working together with the Haitians and the Kenyans. Comrades who in my network, we've been working together precisely to build some of these things of solidarity. There was an event my other colleague who I had asked to be on here had done on the Haiti and on the rebellions now in Haiti and stuff with Kenya. She had something on Thursday around this issue. So we're trying to do these things. But just to open it up to you, Andile, have any questions you have of us?
No, I mean, in the US, for instance, despite the difficulty of a numerical weakness, there is the formal political system, and I know that some people are getting involved, just like our brother, this guy who wrote, who's this brother who's running for elections? West, Cornel West.
Oh no. No, no. Oh, no.
No, but I mean that.
Uh-oh. Might have been an internet thing again. You see, because of the Cornel West thing. You see, you're not supposed to say that brother bring bad luck.
Yeah, I said that. I said as soon as he said that name, it was gonna go to the left, and it did. I said, "Damn."
Oh man. Okay, so maybe what I'll do right now, folks, is I'm not sure what's exactly. Again, I think folks, there is an internet thing. There's like a power thing period in South Africa right now. I think a number of our comrades, I know with our Kenyan comrades, sometimes they have to pay and buy internet. Oh, there you are, Andile, you're back.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, jump back. Sorry, jump back in with stuff on Cornel West where it froze.
Yes. No. I mean, it will be interesting to get feedback because we see Brother Cornel is on the roster and talking about power and so on. And we no longer know how to place him as well. And since we are playing in the formal political space in the Azanian situation, he seemed to be gesturing towards the formal political space, but we don't know whether he represents a real constituency. Does he represent the interests of the grassroots? Who does he speak for?
I'll let Sean start off with that, and then I'll say a few things to get us out of here.
I'm sorry for laughing, but it's like me and Toy were saying, and like I was saying to you before. It's like, he's not speaking for everyday people. Politicians do not speak for poor and working class people, our people, black and brown people, poor and working class. They do not speak for us. They do not. It don't matter what color, what gender, what identity. They'll tell you they speaking for us, but they not. They speaking for their sugar daddies, the funders, the rich, the elite. That's who they're speaking for. At the end of the day, like, for example, you got people like AOC and like a bunch of other former, you have like former Black Panthers and former, young lords that go ahead and say, hey, we're fighting in interest for the people. And it's like, no, you're joining this system. So it's no different for Cornel West. He's not fighting for the interest of us. And I don't even know if he's still running. I don't know if he's still on the ballot. I think he's off there, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So much has been going on.
Yeah, just to give some context. I mean, the idea what Cornel West was to try to like promote another kind of a conversation, etc. And so at first he had this People's Progressive Party platform, whatever, and then he united with the Green Party, mostly because, and the Greens have always been that third party in the US, if you will. And he did that because in the US, as I'm sure you know, with Azania, it's similar, right? It costs money to be on the ballot. And you actually have to have an infrastructure to be on all of the national ballots, because it all goes via state and even down to some of the. And he didn't even know that apparently. So he actually had to get help from the Greens, who have run these national things apparently. And then at some point they seem to have fallen out because he was on things like Black Power Media and some of these different Black nationalist things. He also was doing some Democracy Now! Stuff. He was on some things talking about this alliance with the Greens. But many of us in the Black movement here were like really critiquing, like, what are you doing working with them? Da 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 da, boom boom boom. And then eventually it seems there was some split between him and the Greens, and now the Greens are running the same thing over their same two candidates. I think Ajamu, I want to say, and then I think it's the other white lady again will be doing their thing, etc. And I'm not sure what Cornel West is doing. I think Cornel West. I think the issue with Cornel West, and here's where I do think, Andile, I think that you'll appreciate this, to what Sean's saying, Andile has become at a position, Cornel West has gotten to a position where he's unable to talk to the people on Main Street. He can't, you know, Azuma, say what you want to say about him. He's still in how he talks, in how he moves with people. If you're there in the Lokasi, if you're there in the Shebin, you could hear him. He's talking to you. It's not like talking above you, you know, in these kinds of ways that Cornel West is still doing it, right? I mean, some of us, we have our PhDs, but even his English is too expensive for me. Like I need to go, I need a loan on layaway to afford. You know, and I think I have good English. I think I do, but damn, man, like I'm going to keep up with the brother. so it's joking, but you see the problem is that he's not talking to some of the concrete day-to-day bread and butter issues that people are struggling with. Yes, of course, defunding the military is big and critiquing imperialism is, of course. But of course, as you know, what people want to see, can you do this for me now? You know what I mean? Can you do these for me right now? What power do you have? And Cornel West has no base. I think what Trump is teaching U.S. politics right now is that something that many of us on the continent, I think, do know, is that when you have the masses on your side and you're in power, you're able to do a whole bunch of things. So Trump has the masses in power to implement what he wants. And so he, even not in power, he's still the most powerful man in the United States, even out of formal power right now, because he has the masses on his side, you see. And so I think that's where Cornel West does not have a mass movement behind him. And in the Black movement here, we're trying some things, as you know, but I would say we're very regional, and local is maybe where our strengths are more. There's more strength in certain regions or in particular areas. Like Sean would never say Take Back the Bronx is influential, you know, throughout New York City and throughout New York State to be able to stop things. No, Take Back the Bronx has its particular area, and it's known in New York City. It's known in different spots, right? But in terms of this, you know, the localities of it is real. Even with our other two comrades, my Haitian comrade and my Kenyan comrade, even they're grappling with the Haitian sense. So I know the assassination of the president in Haiti has been tricky because on some hands, people have said he has appropriated a particular Black nationalist image, particularly with voodoo and particularly with kind of talking about Dessalines in a certain type of way and gesturing to this. But a lot of his actual on-the-ground things, particularly the people that my comrade Mamir is working with, he is not necessarily sweeping the same side of the street, and the different fractures are very ruthless there, right? And so that's sort of, I think, something that's also important as we think about. So as I'd say with the Cornel West in that side, I'd say regionally is where some of the Black movements are strongest in certain ways. But for me, what I would maybe make a comparison with the South African situation is I think we are heading to an interesting situation that's very similar to, I would say, 1948 and 49 when the Nash NP comes into power. Remember, the argument is, well, let's vote for the liberal whites and the liberal rights will be better for us, right? The argument was, if you join World War II, if you fight for us here, boom, boom, then this thing will happen. Even Tabata writes that letter to a young Mandela and saying, yo, listen, boy, you're still new at these things. You know, this is actually how these things need to get laid out. And so I think what we're seeing now is, if you will, what we call them the frequentes, if you will, like the hard line is the Trumps who, and then that's the fight now between the whites themselves in the white settler colony. It's a fight between the, if you will, the Anglo capital, if you will, and then the Boer capital, if you will. I would say there's that. It's not the same, of course, culturally and the details here, but if you will, that is the clash between this America that people have in their mind, this liberal, funny thing, and then this right wing that Trump is saying, no, we are this thing here. But they also are promoting this, you know, make America great. That's the clash. And of course, whenever those clashes happen, we generally in a settler colony get used as the unifier before civil war happens. So they usually go after us when, you know what I'm saying, when those things begin to happen. They all studied the Haitian Revolution. So they also know that when the whites are fighting, the blacks are watching. And so that's where I think we are in my own thing in the US sense. But yes, so okay, thank you all very much for this, all of you. I'm sorry our other comrades couldn't come. Again, these are grassroots comrades. I'm sure other people are maybe tired, and particularly our Kenyan comrades. They sometimes have to pay for internet where they're at. They're also students, some of them. They're mobilizing in the townships in Nairobi there. And it's also very different in there because they have to go underground sometimes because the police be hunting them down sometimes. So a number of things I'm trying to check up on them to see how they're doing, but they confirmed earlier this morning things were unable to happen. So I'm wondering if something is happening to them. So I'll check in with that. But thank you everybody for tuning into this. Andela, I really thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to try to do other things like this to get you in communication with some folks here, because I think it's an important election coming up. We will be bringing students, my department, the Africana Studies department will be bringing students to South Africa in May. In Joburg, to Joburg and Cape Town, sort of just to, they do this every other year, but now
I hope you come after the elections, and it will be good to make another intervention like this after the elections, just to lay out what are the real concrete possibilities from those results.
Absolutely. And we'll be in conversation about some of these things. Absolutely. So folks, everyone, thank you so much. I'm ending this stream now. Please have a good rest of your Sunday. And we will post, for those people who of course missed this thing, we'll post the recording online in the next few days. Thank you all very much.